Greetings from the Witch House, my friends. I am your host, Dr. Gallo. Tonight we have a tale of love that knows no bounds, for better or for worse. This was originally published in my book, Nightmare Season. May I present Pins and Needles. Deb knew it was coming. The prickling sensation started, as always, where the top of her left breast became shoulder, and within a few short moments, the whole of her left arm was numb, right down to the fingertips. In spite of the coolness of the April afternoon, the sweat came suddenly, in beads, on her forehead. She managed to pull the car over before she lost control, and as the tyres dug into the wet grass on the verge at the side of the road by the field, there came the now familiar, agonizing, sharp stab to the center of her chest. She screamed as it doubled her over, clutching at it impotently with both hands. As she sat there, hurt and alone, time passed slowly, but it did pass. The pain eventually began to subside and the numbness in her arm became an unpleasant tingling as the feeling began to return. She sat up and watched the windscreen wipers tick back and forth for a few seconds, and then the relief and fear overwhelmed her and brought tears, with great sobs that wrapped her whole body. She felt at her most wretched then, and wished for Robert. The pain had been a mere twinge when it started, some 4 months earlier. She had been cleaning up in the garden, enjoying the unusually warm spring morning, and had stopped to look out over the hills in the distance, their peaks still dusted with snow. A little sharp jab inside her had given her cause to stop drinking her cup of tea mid-sip, and then, like that, it was gone. She hadn't even mentioned it to Robert, and had forgotten about it until it happened again. The next time she was out with Vanessa and Margot for drinks, and some food at the pub in the village. She and Vanessa were creased up laughing at Margot, who was trying to explain the lengths her and Roy had to go to stop the dog whining at the door while they were in bed. As she laughed, Deb felt a small, sharp jab beneath her breastbone. She reached for her glass of wine, assuming it was a piece of haddock that needed to be lubricated to get down to her belly, but her grip faltered and she almost knocked it over. A sudden clamminess came over her, so she excused herself and headed for the bathroom before ducking into a cubicle, locking it behind her. The jab came again, not so little this time. It was so intense that it made her wobble on her feet, and she put a hand on the cubicle wall to steady herself. She thought she was going to be sick, but started to feel normal again after a minute or two. On returning to the table, she told her friend she was coming down with a migraine and drove home. Robert was there, ready to comfort her as always. He told her to have a lie down and brought her some soup in bed. "If it keeps up, you'll need to see a doctor," he told her. She nodded her agreement and smiled at her husband, feeling very loved and so very thankful to have him near. The episodes got gradually worse. The third time it happened, she'd been on the phone to her mum, and just managed to hang up before the moan that swelled inside her broke free. The fourth time, she was home alone as Robert had gone to work. That one had been so bad her legs had buckled, and she'd had to curl up on the living room carpet, knees drawn up to her chest, until it passed. When Robert arrived home, she was still down there, shaking and crying. He helped her up and drove her to hospital there and then. He kept a warm, comforting hand on her knee for the whole journey. She had an electrocardiogram, an x-ray taken of her chest, and a blood test. After a couple of hours in the waiting room, the doctor came back and told her that there didn't appear to be anything wrong from a cardiac perspective. There was no indication that she was having, or had had, a heart attack. He referred her back to her usual doctor for them to dig a little bit deeper. It could be something digestive, he had told her. She knew that it wasn't. The attacks continued, but nothing Dr. Craig suggested seemed to help. Changes in diet like cutting out wheat and lactose did nothing. Missing out on the couple of glasses of wine she usually enjoyed at the weekend made no difference, and neither did cutting out meat for 4 weeks. They ruled out stress. The only stress she had been feeling was from wondering when the next crippling spasm would happen, and what it might mean if she was driving, or up a ladder or something. Dr. Craig had referred her to a specialist clinic to see if there was anything they might pick up that was slightly less usual, and told her not to drive in the meantime. She had managed it a few weeks, but living in the valley was isolated enough without being able to take the car out anywhere. Robert had advised her against travelling, but she felt fine, she told him. She hadn't had any pain in a few weeks. Grudgingly, he agreed, and she took off in the car to her mother's house. She had been on the road for 10 minutes before the pain had forced her off the road, where she now sat, sobbing in the car. She'd called her husband, who was walking down the road to collect the car and drive her back to the house. He'd been everything she needed when she'd spoken to him. Gentle, caring, and steadfast. He was coming to her rescue, and she loved him for it. When the call ended, Robert put the phone in his pocket and picked up the little doll, stroking the lock of his wife's hair he'd stuck to its head with candle wax. There were a few little holes around its chest where he'd been sticking the pin, which he now carefully moved off the dresser and into the shoebox together with the effigy. He replaced the lid on the box and put it under another box in his wardrobe, then bundled a pile of old clothes on top of it so she wouldn't find it. He had to hurry. Deb would be waiting for him with open arms. They'd both sleep soundly tonight, he knew. Her, safe in the knowledge that her husband would do anything to keep her safe, and him, completely certain that she would never, ever be able to let him go.